Good morning. I'm Dr. Kyle Pruitt of the Yale Child Studies Center, also a member of the Early Childhood Peace Consortium, and we are inviting you to the second discussion in the ECPC Raising Children of Peace series. This is a natural topic for us to take on. We're in our 10th year. We have been growing and developing as an organization, and it has become very clear to us that the need for the youthful voice is essential to our being able to spread the very important message about the importance of peace in early childhood. The generation represented on this panel has taught us a great deal about this concept: nothing about me without me. This is an organization of young people and a generation of young people who have given a great deal of thought to how their voice needs to be respected because of the things that they have to say about the way that the world is affecting them very directly. And this discussion is about this intergenerational conversation, which is essential to enlarging our understanding about the importance of peace in the early years. The group that you see in the gallery will be introduced by Kyle King, who is a rising senior at Yale. His invitation to his colleagues has been essential to making this conversation even possible. You will hear from each of them. He will introduce each of them in turn. We will then be joined by Aditi Shikande of the UNICEF at the end for a conversation and roundup of ideas. And then we will finish this morning's conversation with thoughts about the future. Kyle King, thank you. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Kyle. Hello, everybody. My name is Kyle King. As Kyle Pruitt said, I'm a rising senior at Yale, and I myself have been doing advocacy work for about 8 years now, primarily with two organizations, the International OCD Foundation and UNICEF. And before I go ahead and introduce everyone else on this panel, I wanted to take a minute to share my own experiences with advocacy, and hopefully say something interesting as I talk about my work with those two organizations. I started with the International OCD Foundation, or the ICDF, when I was 13, right after I finished treatment for my own OCD. I was diagnosed with that when I was 12, and after a pretty grueling year of treatment, I thought if I could do anything to help someone else with that disorder, I would do that. So I reached out to the ICDF. I asked if I could be an advocate, and they said, sure. But then they gave me no further instruction on how to do that. My journey with UNICEF started 2 years after, when I was in 9th grade. I was walking up a staircase at the back of my high school, and I saw a poster of a boy who was standing in the rubble of what was his school. And here I was standing in my well-funded public school in South Florida, and there he was standing in the remains of his. And I just was struck with this thought that, really there's no difference between him and I just happened to be born here and he happened to be born there. And it felt so unfair to me that because of some arbitrary cosmic coin flip, I had access to all these resources and he didn't. So I felt like I needed to do something about that. And I went and joined my UNICEF club that day. And I've been doing work with both those organizations for 8 years, like I said. And I've gotten to see firsthand how they interact with youth advocates, and they've done it really differently. And I think there's something to be said and learn from the differences that these two organizations show. So starting with the ICDF, since I started there first, when I reached out when I was 13, as I kind of alluded to, they provided me very little support and very little guidance. And they didn't really tell me what I could or couldn't do as an advocate. They just said, sure, you can be an advocate. And I don't know if you remember when you were 13, but I wasn't a terribly confident 13-year-old. I didn't want to talk to adults very much. So for the first couple of years, I really didn't do too much with the ICDF because I didn't really know how to use my voice. My experience with UNICEF was really different. When I was 15 and wanted to join and start working with UNICEF, I just went and joined the club in my high school. And that was a really easy way to get started. And had there not been a club at my high school, UNICEF has full web pages dedicated to helping kids start a club in the United States. And even beyond the clubs program, UNICEF USA has positions baked into their corporate structure for youth advocates. So that's kind of the long way of saying that UNICEF does what the IOCDF didn't, which made it really easy for me to begin my advocacy journey with them. And as a result, for the first couple of years of my advocacy work, I mainly worked with UNICEF. And as I kind of worked my way through the different advocacy positions at UNICEF, I began to build up my voice and I began to become a lot more confident as an advocate. And consequently, I began to have more ideas and really want to implement them more strongly. And that's when I began to realize that the structure that UNICEF had laid out for me and that the IOCDF hadn't was a bit of a double-edged sword. Because over the years, there's been a lot of times at UNICEF where the structure began to feel a bit confining and I began to feel boxed in, and I felt like I couldn't really use my voice as authentically as I wanted to. So looking back at the IOCDF, that experience was totally different, because after I had kind of found my voice at UNICEF, the lack of structure and the laissez-faire governance over there began to feel like a huge asset. I could do the projects that I wanted to do as authentically as I wanted to do them. And I would try certain things, and sometimes they would fail and sometimes they would be great successes. But it was really incentivizing that I was able to do the advocacy work that I really, truly wanted to do. And I don't mean to disparage either organization. They both meant a lot to me as I've been growing up. And they both taught me a lot of really important things. But one thing that I wanted to communicate to all of you as you look to engage youth in whatever organization you're representing here, it's necessary to meet youth where they're at, because before a young person finds their voice and when they're getting started in advocacy, it's really daunting. It's a really scary experience. And it's really important to have those easy to get into positions like UNICEF did to help them along their way and help them find that voice. But once they find that voice, it's really important to genuinely and earnestly hear that voice out and allow a young person to express their voice, lest they might lose it entirely. Okay, that's a lot from me. The two Kyles have spoken too much. It's time to pass it on to the other youth advocates on the call. Just by way of context, we all met, me and the other three young youth advocates, at an event that was hosted by UNICEF last September in New York. We didn't know each other prior to getting to New York, and then we met in New York and we spent 3 days together. And in those 3 days, we grew so close that I could, ask them to participate on a webinar on a whim, which I think is pretty cool that we became such good friends so quickly. And I think it's because we all have a lot in common. So without further ado, the first youth advocate who will be speaking today is Penelope Leia. Penelope is a climate justice advocate primarily from Norway. And she's one of the most accomplished advocates I've ever had the pleasure of meeting in my life. And she's also one of the sweetest people in the world. And I think you'll learn a lot from her. So Penelope, it's your time to shine.
Thank you so much, Kyle. And thank you for your talk. Thank you for having me. I started my activism when I was 8. I started because I was, and I still am, sick and tired of violence and inequalities. And the fight for climate justice, the fight for climate action, is the fight against these very forces. Before I started my activism, I experienced violence in close relations. And this experience actually became my entry into climate activism. It fueled my need to speak up, and it strengthened my impatience in the fight for a peaceful and safe future for everything I love, the people, the nature, and life itself. And this impatience of mine has only grown since then. As we know, climate and nature changes are an amplifier of all other crises we face as human beings. The climate and nature crisis is inevitably linked to the world's security situation, to economics and poverty. It's tightly linked to how we understand ourselves and our own history, and of course to every single one of the human and children's rights. I believe to understand it another way is naive. Therefore, as a climate justice activist, I've found myself working with several of these issues over the past 10 years. And in this talk, I want to share some of my experiences with you. But first, I would love to mention some background on the conversation around climate and nature in my home country, to give you a better idea of how it is to be a climate activist here. I believe I can safely say that the debate around climate and nature changes is the most polarized and heated that there is in Norway. Norway is a small country with 5.5 million people. In 1969, we found oil and gas, and since then we have built our whole economy on oil and gas production and exploration. Just before the summer holiday, 19 new oil licenses were approved by our government, and there is currently no political party that stands a chance of forming a government that wants to stop giving out new oil licenses and move away from fossil fuel dependency fast enough. In 33 years, our government has only cut our greenhouse gas emissions by 4.7%. We are one of the countries in Europe with the most climate deniers. 1 in 4 people in Norway don't believe that climate change is caused by human actions. There is no excuse for Norway to delay change. We have the solutions, the resources, the possibilities, the peace, and the people in power have had the time. We keep on living with and enjoying the freedoms people before us have fought for. Democracies, weekends, 8-hour workdays, they did it for us. And still we seem to think that it is impossible to change the systems we live in. To me, that is double standard. We can change what we view as political impossible. But to be able to create a better world and to make people aware that it is in fact possible to change, it's been proven that we need the voices of young people, and we need to ease the struggles young people face in their advocacy for basic human rights. So now I want to share some struggles with you, me and my friends face in our work. We often talk about how young people need to speak truth to power, but we rarely talk about what happens when power speaks to you, the hate you might receive. A lot of activists live in places where it's not safe to speak your mind or be politically engaged. And even the ones of us that live in safety can be unsafe at some point. We need to hear the voices of these activists. We need to hear the voices of activists from the frontline communities. We desperately need that representation. But we have to make sure that these spaces are safe for young people to be represented in, not just at the stage, but afterwards. You need to follow up and make sure to the best of your abilities that they have the support and safety that they need. One of the ways to do this, I believe, is to build more political organizations for young children, community. When I was younger, it felt life important to be able to use my voice and get heard. For me, it was a question of all or nothing. I needed to use my voice and feel like I had a say in my own life and my own future. I needed to contribute. But when you're young, it's often very difficult to find organizations where you can do just that, where you're not just questioned because of your age, but brought up and valued, where everyone understands that your thoughts are your own and filled with as much integrity as if you were older. I started my activism in an organization like this, but we need help building more of them. Youth organization and frontlines communities needs funding. The money is not going where it's needed. It's in the hands of huge companies and businesses serving exploitive systems, gaining the very few, but not with young changemakers or the frontline communities fighting for a better world. And we need to change the conversation around funding as well. Too often, my friends and I are met with huge skepticism when we advocate for climate finance or funding of youth advocacy communities. But one needs some level of financial security to be able to work for other freedoms. At the UN General Assembly, Priyanka, Dominique, Kyle, and I repeatedly heard the statement, if you don't have a chair at the table, bring your own. That is not possible. If you're not invited and you don't have the resources, it is of course not possible to grab your own chair at the table. And it's not just about having a chair at the table, but having a role at the table, getting opportunities to speak, talk, follow negotiations actively, ask questions. We need to talk about the conversation, the connection between human rights and children's rights, peace, security, and climate change. And a lot of young people in the climate movement wants to talk about these connections because it's crucial to understand, to be able to implement the just solutions and have the just transition we need. But it is, of course, viewpoints, it's seldom, it's hard to get through in media. So we need help from every one of you to bring this conversation forward so we can move forward in the fight for climate justice. I believe activism is in its greatest form, peace building in its nature. We might never know which of our actions may lead to change or may make more people follow in our footsteps. Therefore, everything we do may turn out to be important. When I hear myself speak now, I realize that a lot of points I have to do with building safety for young people in one way or another. I believe to be able to build peace in any form, you need safety. Peace is, in my experience, not always peaceful, but you need safety to be able to fight for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Penelope. That was incredible. And when you mentioned that phrase, like if there's no seat at the table or bring your own chair, that I remember hearing that phrase so often that it became somewhat hollow. Because yeah, like you said, in my experience, it's not always as simple as just bringing a chair. And there are a lot of times there are people at the table who don't want to hear from a young person, even if you get there in the first place. Our next speaker is Dominique Ogriano, which I hope I pronounced correctly. And she is a young advocate from Romania. When Kyle asked me what advocates I'd want to have on this panel, I immediately thought of Dominique because I've met a lot of advocates through the years, and I don't know if I've met anyone else whose emotion and like raw passion for the subjects that they advocate on is as evident as it is when Dominique speaks. They're really special, and I'm really excited for this talk.
Hi, thank you so much, Kyle. This is that was such a nice introduction. I wasn't expecting. Definitely no pressure on me to deliver that emotion. So I'm very grateful to be here with all of you. I'm so grateful for Penelope for sharing her experience before me, because a lot of the things that she has touched upon also will find themselves throughout my talk as well. So when I was first invited here, the first question that popped into my head was, what is peace? Because we hear this word everywhere, and it's on TV all the time. We hear it at high-level dialogues at school. So in preparation for the talk and for my speech, I asked the children that I work with, how do they define the concept? What is peace for them? And I observed that as their age got higher, their responses were more complicated, right? They were sprinkling this according to this academic paper, or it's actually hard to define. And it was, and less of their answers came from their souls and too many from the external forces that they have interacted with. So one very, very interesting definition that I heard, and it was from one of my colleagues that is 10, was that peace is the possibility to play without fear. And it was very important because many children trade their childhoods to fight because the problems are so pressing. So fear is one of the worst motivators, but it is one that brings children to advocacy, be it fear of not being accepted to fear of being killed. And upon hearing the word fear, I immediately thought about resilience. How many times did we as youth advocates hear that we are resilient? How many times did you as an adult hear it? And resilience has become code word for silence. You're so resilient because you can take injustice so easily. You absorb it and you don't make a sound. You don't express the grief you feel, the worthlessness, the exhaustion, because you can take it. And this upholds the idea of individuality, like you are the sole responsible for your mood. And it is through this that we allow each other to rid of the collective duty of protecting one another. It is this that becomes an obstacle to intergenerational communication, to peace, because peace means taking care of each other. Now, to understand how youth advocates, how to help youth advocates, you must understand their journey. And while what I'm about to talk about might not be a universal account, since everybody has a unique way, it is based on my experience and on those of the people that I truly love. I truly believe that there are three feelings that you encounter at all times in your activist path. One is rage. The other is loneliness coupled with belonging, which I name as the feeling of in-betweenness. And then there's hope. These coexist at any time during your path. They don't alchemize from one into the other. They uplift each other. They spring from one another. So let's start with rage. I often felt that my country was at war with me, that its hatefulness for dissenting bodies pierced through my soul, and it extracted all the light and the love I was desperately trying to harbor. So determined to banish me from contesting their hegemonic practices, different systems like nationalism, capitalism, heteronormativity invaded the minds of others, my teachers, my colleagues, my friends, isolating me from those I was fighting for. And it is not easy to care for a community that seeks to destroy your will and agency and to convince you of your worthlessness. Because these oppressive systems seeping through the minds of those we love show up, as Penelope said, as immutable, their power impossible to contest without a movement. So with this in mind, in the universe amusing arrangements, architects sat down, created a city at the intersection of the public and the private, and asked the vital question: what if we put together people broken by the same systems and just let them love each other? So in a room with a circular table on the third floor of a building in the city of Forli, a group of students from different parts of the world and their professor met every day to discuss theory as a way of survival. All having been hated by their countries at a point in their lives, all aching for connection and understanding, they explored the musings of those in history who shared their struggles, unintentionally creating a transgenerational knowledge hub. This is how you build a movement. You bring the outcasts, the thinkers, the believers, the reformers, the revolutionaries, those who want to rebuild the systems that are hurting them, and you make them a safe haven. And in this place of safety, you let them revolt. You conspire with them, you make plans, you organize, you let them discover their identity. I remember the immense rightful rage that I felt when in my freshman year of high school, my colleagues, my LGBTQ colleagues came to me and told me that we can't keep each other from dying, as they were building their own networks of care in absence of support from our teachers. Because what else can you feel when your planet is on fire? Or when you get denied life-saving procedures, or when you are outed and marginalized? What are you supposed to feel if not rage? We encounter unfairness at different times in our life, but the first feeling is that we are alone in this hurt, that we are the first to experience this. This is where intergenerational support comes in. Visibility is everything as you discover people who think like you and who for decades have been involved in the same activism. Activism is a love story. Beyond the anger, there is a group, a movement, a collective to which you belong and with which you fight. And in the darkest of nights, when you're defeated, it is the people that become your fuel, the solidarity and support you're overcome with. When you're in tears and at the brink of giving up, you look up to them and they reassure you that they fought through worse times and that you have the tools and the foundation to fight whatever your enemy is. But above all, you have the promise of no matter what. No matter what happens, intergenerational support has your back. In these spaces of safety, you learn to choose joy over doom. You're free to play. You construct this safe haven of peace, this man-made circle of unity. And then you take it outside to the real world. Soon enough, you become a safe space for others. The peace inside of yourself reflects outwards. While you constantly wonder what really is the impact you're making, your caretaker will sit you down and tell you, I don't understand this issue you're advocating for yet, but I'm willing to learn. Your friend will ask you to go to a protest together. Your teacher will sign your petition. The youth you encounter will ask you how to get involved. You will become a catalyzer, a unifier, an antidote. All we really want as youth is to be safe, to be understood, to see our loved ones and caretakers enjoy safety as well. Now, for this to happen, adults need to decenter themselves, to come into our communities, to bring the power table that we've been talking about before into our communities and let us work together instead of against each other. While safety continues to be seen in securitization terms like countries, borders, national spirit, we must remember that these are abstract concepts, but people are real. Feelings are real. When we try to define peace, perhaps we should ask ourselves how peace feels rather than what it means. So I want to leave you with a question before I end. How does peace feel to you? And I'll start. For me, peace feels like relief. It feels like taking a breath after holding it for so long, because finally, in the dark room that you thought you were in, and that my country was desperately trying to put me in at the beginning of the story, there suddenly are people's hands to hold, light garlands, and a lot of hope. That was it. Back to you, Kyle.
Yeah, Dominique, you you more than lived up to the introduction I gave you. Um, I'm reflecting on the question, what does peace feel like? That's a complicated question to answer. I think I would say like ease in a way. I'm thinking of my own experiences being marginalized for having a mental disorder, and walking into a place and not being marginalized for that feels like ease to me. But I'd have to think about it further. Our third youth advocate is Priyanka Lala. She's an advocate from Trinidad and Tobago. And just a cool part of her biography that I wanted to highlight before she speaks is that she is an author and an illustrator of a book called Sfara's Ocean Adventure that she published in 2022. And I feel like it's a little unfair that someone has like that much talent, like they can draw and they can write. I don't know. It just kind of made me mad. But Priyanka, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. Cal's story resonates with me because when I was about 6 years old, when I saw a young boy about 8 years old selling vegetables with his parents, I told my grandfather that I wanted to be his friend. I felt that if we knew each other, he would live my same life. And growing up in a small island, he has allowed me to have a close look at the world around me. It's given me an incredibly unique and invaluable appreciation for nature, and therefore a passion to protect it. The beauty of my island was mine to explore and cherish, and this is truly where my advocacy began. In 2017, at the age of 10, I came to the realization that this narrative of protecting and preserving the environment was not practiced by most of our region. Evidence of dumping was discovered in the mountains of debris and pollution washed up after the devastating hurricanes Irma and Maria. I felt compelled to take action, and I knew that if I wanted to see change, I could not go around asking others to change. I needed to start on my own, and I needed to lead by example to mitigate the risks of my country and region's peace and security. My advocacy began with education. I believed that our school curriculums did not sufficiently address climate and environmental issues, and certainly there was little focus on meaningful sustainability. Our economy, similar to Penelope, is based on oil and gas, and we have little attempts at diversification to ensure a regenerative economy. Young people need more opportunities to thrive, and this has led to brain drain over the years. This is a threat to our country's peace. I decided that I would be the change I wanted to see to build a more sustainable country and a more sustainable region. And this inspired my blog, Zero Waste Living. I learned a great deal from my grandparents who live sustainably because they learned from their parents, and that influenced the way in which my family already lived. I guess we can say this is an example of intergenerational education that was happening in my home. And this quest for sustainability led to the creation of the Zero Waste Lunchbox, an initiative that I started at my school. I encouraged students to pack a lunch with no disposables or plastic. And my dream was that one day this would become a Caribbean-wide initiative. I simultaneously created a zero waste blog. I researched and wrote about how we can make almost every aspect of our lives more sustainable. And I realized that meaningful climate action was not difficult for my small island. We did not need to reinvent the wheel because the solutions already existed, as just a few decades ago, our grandparents were living sustainably. When I became a National Child Rights Ambassador, I found a connection between climate change and every aspect of child rights and human rights. But what stood out to me the most was that along with child rights came responsibilities. We have the right to a healthy and safe and thriving environment, but it is our responsibility to maintain and ensure that for ourselves and for future generations. And after around 4 years of consistent advocacy, young people started to contact me, asking me what gave me the courage to do this or how they could get involved. And it became so clear to me that There was an audience of young people out there, but they lacked the opportunities and the support they needed to realize their true potential. And one of my successes was becoming a UNICEF youth advocate, where I was able to meet young, enthusiastic people like Kyle, Penelope, and Dominique, who truly are passionate about their cause. And working with UNICEF and its partners has helped me to learn more about the climate crisis and how every aspect of our lives is affected by it. I would say that one of my biggest accomplishments is my participation in the regional consultation for Latin America and the Caribbean on drafting the General Observation number 26 on children's rights and the environment, with a special focus on climate change. And after this conference, my 8-year-old sister, Svara, and I wrote and illustrated and published Svara's Ocean Adventures. Our objective was truly climate education, engaging, empowering, and inspiring climate education, giving children the solutions that they could implement even at such a young age. But I still believe that we have an uphill battle in small island developing states. We are still faced with the issues of general disconnect between real climate action and what is being taught in schools and local programs. Climate and environmental issues are taught in science class without any reference to how we are contributors on a daily basis. Many young people continue to use single-use plastics and are often encouraged to start beach cleanups. However, they do not realize that they are contributing to the problems. What is required is not cleaning up every time, but a reduction, but in short term, and ultimately a ban of these items and environmental laws to be enforced. It is our peril if this is ignored. Our vulnerability is always evident when we are hit by natural disasters. Entire communities are destroyed, causing children to be taken out of school to support their families. And when they are taken out of the education system, they are forced into child labor, child marriages, and due to less income, they are usually left with poor nutrition and no way out of this cycle. Our rising crime rate, food insecurity, increasing figures in non-communicable diseases, and urgent need for transformative education are some of the factors that jeopardize regional peace. People fail to make these connections between the reality and the climate crisis, which we feel and see the implications of every day. We cannot have sustainable development and peace under these circumstances. And while I have seen a growing number of young people joining the conversation or taking action in small ways, it is not enough. In a country with 1.4 million people, the numbers in the conversation are very small, a few hundred maybe. I also question the quality of involvement, as sometimes young people are invited as what appears to be tokenism for photo ops or preparation of reports for funding agencies, and plans for meaningful long-term engagement seem to be theoretical. I truly believe in intergenerational action, where we must work collectively and in harmony to create affordable, accessible, and sustainable education systems with capacity building opportunities and programs for young people to truly be engaged and to know that they have a right to have a meaningful seat at the table. But there's always hope. Thank you.
That was also just an incredible speech. I was just reflecting again on the seat on the seat at the table and the issue of tokenization that you brought up, because I felt that multiple times through my advocacy. Just feeling like I was invited to an event. Someone took a picture of me and that picture ended up on a PDF online somewhere. But I didn't really get to say anything at the event other than just cheese. Kyle Pruitt, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kyle. I'm writing down pearls as fast as I can. I feel very privileged to be sitting here with this remarkable group of young people. I'm struck by their passion, by their impatience, their the problems at the table that they so accurately highlight. This conversation is I hope, an antidote to that problem at the table. The hope that I believe Dominic spoke about reminded me, I believe Bill McKibben, the very active climate activist, talked about hope as a verb with its sleeves rolled up. And each of you have talked about action, passion. Your competence is very obvious. And we are looking forward to hearing not only more from you, but we're now going to have the treat of listening to Aditi Shrikande, who is the Early Childhood Development Program Officer from UNICEF. And Aditi has the delightful task of summarizing some of the things that she has learned. I hope she is as perturbed as I am by the wonderful things that you have brought to our table today. Aditi.
Thank you, Kyle. Yes, I do want to echo exactly what you've just said. This has been so fascinating, and I really appreciated learning from each of the experiences that you've shared. So big thank you to all of our presenters today. And I think some of the things that you spoke about really caught on to a lot of the key themes that at UNICEF as well, we try to incorporate into peace building, things like community leadership and community engagement, mental health and well-being, and empowering young people to be leaders and supporting their organizations and initiatives. I think these were all things that I heard from all of you, and at the heart of UNICEF's peace building work, this is what we strive to do as well, to take a child-centered social services approach and to bridge community and intergenerational divides to reduce social tension and address the root causes of conflict, which I think some of you also mentioned. So there was a lot of alignment there, and I appreciated hearing that from a less theoretical, jargon-filled way and more applicable to people who are living their lives every day. So it was great to have that framing. I said a life course approach is what UNICEF takes. And again, I think this is something that I heard from many of you, particularly Priyanka. I noted that you mentioned solutions for age-appropriate solutions that children could take to participate. And I really like that you brought up that point. So as Kyle Pruitt mentioned, my background is in early childhood development. And we believe that peace starts early. Right from birth, children are interacting with the world around them, and they're developing critical skills, emotional regulation, empathy, social skills. And there are two really key moments for building these cognitive and socialization skills. And one of those is early childhood, so which would be roughly the ages of 0 to 8. And the other is in adolescence, which is, I think we heard many of our presenters today started their journeys around that time, which is incredible. So these periods of time, particularly in early childhood, is when children are learning attitudes and behaviors towards the other. And in resource poor contexts, the access to services that promote early childhood development can also act as social equalizers. So they can help with breaking cycles of inequities and injustice, making individuals and societies more resilient to stress. Dominique, I noted your point on the use of the word resilience, and I love that you brought that up. So when I say resilience now, I mean a communal, societal resilience rather than an individual, let's pretend everything is okay. And I really appreciated that you unpacked that. So UNICEF has recently come out with a new vision for early childhood development, which explicitly recognizes the symbiotic relationship between peace building and fulfilling children's rights, particularly their right to development. And of course, this applies to working with young people as well. UNICEF's mandate goes up to 18, but of course we recognize the fundamental role that anywhere people from adolescents to young people, whatever that category looks different according to whichever theoretical framework you're looking at, but essentially we know the activists we're speaking about. And there is an underlying trust in the fact that youth play a really catalytic role in building peace. And therefore, the work that UNICEF tries to do is to teach peace building and resolution skills, conflict resolution skills, to support those youth-led initiatives that we've heard about today at a community level and at wider levels as well, and to really strengthen the participation, the meaningful participation of young people in national dialogues and decision-making and peace-building processes. I think it's a fairly common complaint, really, that tokenism sort of takes over rather than actual meaningful participation. So I do believe that that's one of the things that UNICEF is trying to work on as well, and I appreciated that our presenters spoke more to that. I think what I found really motivating about what all of you spoke about today was the way that you reframed these topics. I think very often topics, particularly those associated with young people, tend to be depoliticized. And I appreciated that you reframed that, you politicized it, and you made that clear connection to peace. Actually, I think there was a particular, yes, sorry. Penelope, you mentioned you never know which actions lead to peace. And I think that is something that becomes very true, particularly in defining peace, right? This is, again, a topic that was spoken to. So, we've had things like climate change are slowly but surely becoming political, but not necessarily things like sustainable initiatives like those that you've told us about, Priyanka, that you started, or mental health or community. Or I believe there was a phrase Dominique used, the networks of care. And all of these being highlighted as efforts and acts of peace building is what I truly appreciated that all of the presenters brought to the floor today.
Aditi, could I interrupt for just a second?
Please.
And as you were talking about networks of care, I want to remind people that their questions are welcome in the chat. We will be monitoring those, and after Aditi has completed her comments, we will address the questions that you would like addressed, not only to the presenters, but to Aditi as well. Speaking of networks of care, you are all a part of it. Thank you very much. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. It was actually great timing. I was just about to move into the discussion portion. So I noted from many of you that you mentioned the lack of meaningful participation or the opportunities for that participation. And I think something that we've seen through research is that young people, research and of course hearing from experiences, young people often create their own spaces for expression and building community and leadership. And for example, using digital platforms, online advocacy. And I'm just wondering, have any of you encountered the need to find your own space in the same way? And if so, what did that look like in your experience? And over to anyone who would like to respond to that.
I can go first, maybe. I think that is what activism is about. I constantly search for new ways, new peaceful and democratic devices I can use in order to contribute to the changes we need to see. And a lot of these things are spaces we make ourselves, And Fridays for Future movement internationally and nationally in my home country is a great example of this, I believe. And millions of young people going out into the streets, building our own platforms and strengthening each other in our work. So that is just one example of like many things. Many times we've built our own communities, build our own places. Yeah, I think that's the core of being an activist.
Thank you, Penelope. Did any of our other presenters want to speak to this?
I'd just like to add on to what Penelope said. In my personal experience, one of my first initiatives was my zero waste blog. And I started blogging because it's a tool that I learned how to use in school. And I felt that, social media and the digital space is where our generation is. It's where we spend most of our time. And it was how I could engage with my peers and other young people in the Caribbean. And I started blogging about zero waste, not only to engage with young people, but also their parents and their guardians, and being able to create something more personal and unique to our circumstances. How can we implement these sustainable habits into our households, our school curriculums, our communities, to make it a Caribbean-wide initiative and something that's easy and affordable to implement? And social media and my zero waste blog was the perfect avenue to achieve this because of its reach and its connectivity.
Thank you, Priyanka. And I want to appreciate as well that you said the reach of the blog, but you have also were an active part of creating that reach. And I think that needs to be acknowledged. Kyle or Dominique, did you want to come in as well?
Yeah,
If
I
not-
wanted to. Yeah, sure. Because I feel like, especially locally, a physical safe space was always created by the community, right? Children and youth advocates have created their own additional spaces inside their schools if they never felt safe there, or outside of schools. And adding on to what Priyanka said about the digital space, I think that the digital space has brought a component of transnationality to youth advocates organizing, right? You find somebody in a different country that has the same problems as you, and together you create this transnational space of solidarity. And from there, you of course have lovely initiatives like the one we are participating in today, right? Because Kyle reached out to us digitally, and now we're all here from different parts of the world. So I think that constructing your own space as an activist is, like Penelope said, one of the core components of advocacy.
I also have experience, I guess, making my own spaces. I started a support groups for young people, or community groups for young people with OCD and stuff like that. But the challenge is remaining in silos of just young people doesn't get the job done all the time. And it's important to have conversations like these where we interact across generations and with people who are in, I guess, higher up positions, to make more systems level change. And you mentioned tokenization at the very beginning of this question. And one point about kind of tokenizing or having youth kind of at events and maybe not knowing if you're engaging in tokenization or not. I've felt tokenized at different events within UNICEF or the International OCD Foundation. And when that's happened, I've felt, angry at times. But it's, even though I was tokenized, it felt nice to be there. And it gave me a lot of confidence being in those spaces. And even if maybe people didn't respect me that time or didn't listen to what I said that time, being there made me feel like my voice mattered a little more than it did before. And then the next time I was there, I was able to talk a little louder, and maybe they didn't hear me that time, but then the next time I was able to talk a little louder. So I guess if someone is scared that they might be engaging in tokenization, invite youth anyway, because in my experience, it's only helped me get a little bit closer to being heard.
Thank you, Kyle. And I appreciated the practical solution there as well. That's a great way to think about it. I would love to be able to open this up to the Q&A. At the moment, I don't see anything in the Q&A box, but if anyone in the audience has a question for our presenters, please do add it into there. And while we're waiting for those to come in, I'm just going to monopolize your time some more because I find you very interesting. And I think actually many of the things that you said lead me into this next question. This idea that creating your own spaces is fundamental to activism, and the idea that you grow as activists, I think are fairly new-ish ideas for many of us. I mean, some of you were speaking about activism from when you were younger. I remember when I attempted activism at the age of 10, there were no options for digital participation or creating my own space in that same way. So I'm wondering, you have been you've been on this journey for a while now. You have been activists and leaders for some time. And I'm wondering if in the span of that time, you've noticed any differences in the way that you've been able to engage or the impact that your voice has made. And I know you did a little bit speak to this, but was there anything specific that you've noticed has changed since you started?
So, I mean, for me at least, being an activist means reacting to the times you're living in and changing times, being present. And I constantly change my ways and try to highlight new issues when it happens something in our world that didn't happen a week ago, that is new, because we know that what happens in the world around us, in society, in one way or another happens to us. So the COVID pandemic is one example where I needed to change my activism in order to reach people. We created campaigns digitally and movements digitally instead to reach people. And at least in my part of the world, the war in Ukraine has changed what I talk about when I talk about activism, when I talk about climate advocacy. We talk about the connections between war and peace and democracy and climate change and nature changes more often now. And we talk about fossil fuel dependency, how it's important that we move away from fossil fuel dependency in order to create peace, to not be reliant on dictatorships. So that's just examples of things that are happening in recent years that has kind of changed the way I do activism and what I highlight in my work.
Thank you, Penelope. That was a great example of practically what that looks like for you, and I appreciate you sharing that. Kyle, I think I noticed you pop up earlier. Did you have something you wanted to add?
The thing that's always difficult for me, because I'm a bit of a Luddite, is I have to keep up on which social media platforms and how best to communicate with the people I'm trying to reach. Because a lot of the times when I would be working with UNICEF or the ICDF, they'll be like, oh, just let's post something to Forbes.com and let's engage youth there. And I'll have to be like, no, that's not what we're using. Let's start a TikTok right now and see if we can reach people that way. So that's something I always have to keep up on and change.
Thank you. I'm not sure if our other speakers had anything they wanted to add.
Yeah, I would just like to add something. I think for me personally, I've learned more about my audience and the changes that I've learned more about my audience and the changes that they experience. I think, especially in the Caribbean, the leadership has always been traditionally top down, with youth participation may not be always meaningful or long term. And I think along with that, I've realized that as activists and advocates, we can only reach so much due to this huge knowledge gap. And this made me really realize the importance for education and encouragement, understanding how we are uniquely affected and how we are contributors yet victims. And I think really understanding that has played a major role in how I've tweaked my activism, as Penelope was saying, adjusted my own advocacy to reach my audience and young people here, understanding how we're affected by natural disasters, flooding, and what we can do in order to mitigate and adapt.
Thank you, Priyanka. And I think your answers have also helped conceptualize, what exactly activism can look like, across the board, which is great. I am conscious of the time, so I think I'd like to take one question from the audience before passing over to Kyle Pruitt to close. So we have a question from Paul Stevenson, which is, what guidance or experiences do the panel have for strategies that help to sustain their movements or spaces? And Paul clarifies that this could include sustaining momentum and motivation as much as funding and resourcing.
I can take over. So you said it really well, Paul, there, funding. Funding is really vital for our movements. And Moreover, funding that doesn't alter the movement, right? Because sometimes we're conditioned to the ideas that we can present in our movements through to the funding. And again, what I would say again in the momentum part would be children and youth advocates need to understand that they're making a difference, right? So trying to engage them in very meaningful ways and seeing how they make that impact is going to keep momentum up. Also, mentorship. I know that it's very important, and I talked about it in my speech as well, to have somebody who has been through different experiences and can mentor the movement without diminishing the light of each person that who is part of the movement. And I would also say that it's important to be mindful of the mental health of children and of youth advocates. I know that I was ready to do absolutely everything for the movement, and that meant a lot of burnout and not having the tools to navigate the spaces. And so I would see a lot of children being pushed to their limits by activism and by adults who didn't really know how to approach this, right? So make sure that when you're engaging children and to keep this momentum up, you give them the space to also rest, to also play, to also enjoy childhood. So that's from my part.
Thank you, Dominique. Would any of the other panelists like to add to that? No? Fantastic. In which case, Kyle Pruitt, I will hand it over to you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Aditi. I'm sorry to say this wonderful conversation, which in my view is just beginning, has to come to close because we've run out of time. A few final thoughts. One, about the concept of resilience, which Dominique and others have talked about. In my own view as a child psychiatrist, I have seen resilience massively misused. It is not an individual trait of a child. In fact, that can be so politicized that if it is an individual trait, then why should governments do anything to help children who are vulnerable? Resilience is a property of an environment, not just simply the child that's in it, but the state around it, the people that love that child and protect it as well. So let's not be simple-minded when we come to talk about resilience, and our panel obviously is way ahead of many of us in understanding that. I would like to conclude our comments with an invitation to think together about how ECPC could use such a youth working group to move forward. Their passion, their competence, and their ability to really provoke us to talk about the right things makes perfect sense. Follow us on the ECPC newsletter. Our the third lecture in this series will feature Sherry Weston, who's the president of Sesame Workshop, and Dr. Hiro Yoshikawa, who will be talking about a variety of interventions that have been phenomenally successful in migratory and refugee camps around the world. Thank you for being with us. Thank you to the panel. What a contribution they have made to us today. Thank you.